Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you for tuning into the Slumpbuster with Ju-Ju Dre, episode 7, recording here on Friday 13th, September 2019. Find us on all major streaming platforms. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about Team USA struggles in the 2019 FIBA World Cup. We're going to be talking about Khabib's impressive victory in Abu Dhabi, and also have our first major discussion on Major League Baseball. Without further ado, welcome to the show.
Welcome in. This is our 10th official episode, so congratulations, Dre. We have made it to double digits, which is comforting in a week where we got beat by the French of all teams.
Obviously, I was rooting for Team USA. I think USA's seen better days when it comes to basketball.
Yeah, so let's talk about these games. Let's jump into it. So just to clarify, so this is just the World Cup, which our players don't seem to take as seriously as the Olympics, but even still, it's always disappointing when the U.S. team doesn't really show out. So in this tournament, they lost to not only the French, but then they followed that up with a disappointing loss to Serbia, too, where they were just getting ran out the building at a certain point. They were down 32-7 in that game against the Serbs, but against the French. So this game was tied at 76 with 3:40 left to go in the fourth quarter, and then the French just ran away with it. They were led by a combination of Rudy Gobert with 21 points, 16 rebounds, and then you also had some contributions from Fournier, Quinta, and Batum, and yeah, it just led to a disappointing tournament for the U.S. team. So what do you kind of make of this?
Yeah, so we've talked about it before, and this was definitely one of the weaker USA teams, right? So we've talked about some of the reasons for that being, a lot of the stars are probably looking forward to the season, right? They're playing with their teams and their guys because they're trying to win an NBA championship, especially because it's so open this year. So you have guys like Anthony Davis is on a new team, right, with the Lakers. He doesn't want to play in Team USA. Kawhi Leonard, right, and Paul George, they're probably out of it because, they think they have a shot with the Clippers. And even some of our young talents, there's some guys that I question why they're not playing, right, like a Devin Booker. And I'm not calling, Booker out necessarily, but his team doesn't really have a shot at winning, right? It might have been a good experience for him. But we knew this was going to be a weaker team, so I wasn't too surprised by some of the losses.
I mean, you don't want to call Booker out, but I'm going to call Booker out. I'm going to call De'Aaron Fox out, Marvin Bagley, all our young guys who decided to bail out on this tournament. I understand it's a half-court time a year for a lot of them, but at the same time, it's like, again, the league MVP was in this tournament. Jokic, who's on a team that's arguably a title contender, was in this tournament and playing. You had a bunch of other guys who are going to be on winning franchises this year. And then you have guys, like we mentioned, a Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox, who are maybe fringe playoff teams that we don't even know if they're going to be competing for a title. And they decided up and bail on this tournament. And it's going to be interesting to see whenever this team goes to the 2020 Olympics, whether or not Jerry Colangelo is so inclined to even invite those guys back. I think he has to, just because we're struggling for talent. I was watching The Jump the other day, and Rachel Nichols brought up a great point, and I think it's true. So when you look at our under 25 talent right now in the USA, we're not providing the best guys right now. It's clear that the best guys are not coming from the U.S. right now. I mean, no disrespect to Donovan Mitchell, no disrespect to Jason Tatum, but when you look at what we're going up against with a Giannis, with a Jokic, with all these guys, they are far superior talents, or at least more NBA ready by the time they come to us.
So that's actually kind of interesting, and I've been thinking about this quite a bit. I think that LeVar Ball, right, of all people to bring up on sports shows, but LeVar Ball, he didn't go about things the right way, but he's thought about, hey, I want to do something different with my boys, right, to get them into the NBA. So he took them out of college. And a lot of people laughed in his face, which I agree. I thought it was sort of a bad decision, a bad idea. I didn't think he should have gone that way. But I think you're right. There is something to, hey, some of these foreign leagues are starting to develop some pretty good talent, right? Like Luka Doncic was one of them. You named Jokic, right? And quite a few other people. And so I think we do have to start paying attention to international competition a little bit more. And I wonder if we start to see even more scouts going overseas and trying to bring in more foreign players.
Now, do you think that we can bring in the A team for the 2020 Olympics? Do you think guys who are going to be disappointed by this loss might gear up a little bit more? Like we could bring in a Harden or a Westbrook, or guys that decided to bail on the World Cup tournament?
I definitely think we can. Like I said, to me, I think a lot of this is this sort of season right now for the NBA is a lot of people's best chance at winning a title, right? So you don't have your juggernaut like your Golden States anymore. and it's a little bit more open. It becomes a little bit less open when you start getting some of these injured players back, right? So you get Klay Thompson back, Kevin Durant will be back after that. And so with then, I think the league starts to close a little bit, and we might see some of our star players, especially the ones that don't have a shot anymore, possibly playing for Team USA. And I think there is something to be motivated, right? We went from being undefeated for 58 straight games to now we lost, 3 essentially, if you include the sort of scrimmage that we had against Australia, but definitely 2, and to not even place in the top 3 in the world, which I had thought we were probably favored to win the entire thing. But like I'd said earlier, I wasn't going to be surprised if we lost in the semis or something. But to only finish top 10 and not even in the top 7 is a little bit disappointing.
I'm kind of disappointed, though, with like the excuses that a lot of like the media is making for this team as a whole. Now, this team definitely had a flawed roster. With the late withdrawals, the injuries, they lost a lot of their depth at like the guard position, but even more so, they didn't really have a like outstanding big man. I think that showed against a team like France with a Rudy Gobert, who had 21 points to 16 rebounds in that game. And Jokic didn't have the biggest game in the world, but he was still a factor. That Serbian team was one of the more lanky, tall teams in the tournament, and that's why I think they just got beat up on so hard in that game. So it's going to be interesting to see how they really rectify that, like moving forward, get more size on this team. I don't know who you really add right now, as there's not really an outstanding American big man.
Yeah, there's really not. I think LeBron's, obviously taken a step backwards, and even him, he's more of a small forward, power forward. I thought Anthony Davis can be a really good 4-5 guy, but Anthony Davis has come out and said, hey, I don't really like to play the 5, right? And so I think you're right. I think there are some holes in sort of our big men for the United States. Al Horford's pretty good defensively, so we'll see how. I'm actually excited to see how he matches up with Jokic. But yeah, you're right. There's not a whole lot of good bigs that I think can compete with some of the other international big guys that are out there. Now, something that I will say too when we get back to the losses is the Serbia loss. I'm very disappointed in it, though I'm not surprised. I think a lot of times what happens, especially in tournament play, is you're really hoping to get to the finals or whatever, and then you lose, right, in the semis or something, and then after that you're sort of depressed, then you lose another game, and it's very easy to, sort of fall into a lull. So I had thought that was the risk with Serbia, whereas, everybody else is still gunning, to be the best, whereas USA, we had thought, hey, we have a shot at another world championship, right, another world title, and then you lose. All your players are sort of down in the dumps, whereas Serbia, for them, this is still a very important game for all of those players. And so I'm not super surprised that we went on to actually lose again. It is disappointing, though.
Well, I mean, it's obvious you're right. They did come back, not necessarily in the right mindset to play that game against Serbia. I mean, when you start off with the first quarter ending in 32-7, it's clear you're not in the right mental state. Mm-hmm. And they obviously weren't taking that game as seriously, too, when you just look at the minutes played. The only player that exceeded 30 minutes in that game was Kemba Walker, and he had 18 points in that game. Not a bad day at the office, but Harrison Barnes led this team, which, no disrespect to Harrison, but he would have not really had 28 minutes of play on past USA team rosters.
Hey, going back to the big man thing real quick, do you know what team Joel Embiid is playing for? Because I know he's not from the U.S., but I don't know if he would even play on a U.S. team. So that's another big man, right, that we potentially
but I also do think that the Sixers in particular probably would step in with someone like Embiid, who has a huge injury history, and not want him to necessarily waste minutes in the offseason, quote unquote, waste the minutes. I think it's important still, but really the league doesn't feel the same way.
Yeah, and it is one of those weird things where the NBA, right, is so important that it sort of outweighs the world championships, right? And like we were talking about earlier, is that NBA championships to most of these guys means a whole lot more than a world or an Olympic championship. So that's a good point.
Well, it's just a disappointing week all around. Do you have kind of like any more that you want to touch on with this team?
No, I don't think so. I am glad to see, some of our young guys get out there and play. And so I commend those guys. I think we are being a little bit tough, right? Like, hey, I'm just glad these guys went out and competed, still represented us well, but it was disappointing. And that's pretty much all I could say.
Yeah, they sacrificed their summer. Popovich said it in the post-game press conference, too, that we do have to celebrate the guys who did decide to show up. it's so glaring at all the guys who decided not to show up. It's hard not to notice when you saw this team perform on the court. But speaking of Europeans beating up on Americans this week, let's not forget what happened this past Saturday. Khabib, a mess of a last name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce, destroyed Dustin Poirier this week to basically move his undefeated streak to 28-0. This means that he has the third longest undefeated streak to start a career. The only ones that exceed him is Luis Rafael Laurentino at 31 wins and Julio Cesar Neves Jr. at 30 wins. Neither of those two guys have competed in the UFC either, by the way. So Khabib, he's really put himself at the top of the pack right now. So kind of like break down Khabib's fight for me.
Yeah, so Khabib, he always has, and it's Nurmagomedov, right? So try to say that 5 times fast, Ju-Ju.
Nurmagomedov.
You're telling me you don't speak Russian?
I think to assume I did would be Russian to conclusions there.
Too many dad jokes, Ju-Ju. Too many dad jokes. But no, so Khabib, he's always got the same game plan. I think this is part of what makes him so good. Is the dude's been training right since he was really young. So to give you a little bit of background on Khabib, and I'm actually disappointed that more people don't respect what he's been through and sort of what he is. I think a lot of it is, in some ways, he was sort of made the bad guy in the Conor McGregor fight, jump in the cage and all of that. And so for anybody that doesn't have background, there was a lot of contention between Conor's camp and Khabib's camp. And some stuff was said. It made Khabib very upset, and he jumped over the cage, right, and attacked one of Conor's training partners, coaches. And so I think a lot of people see Khabib as a bad guy, though I really don't think so. And so if you look at his background and where he's coming from, it actually makes sense why that would happen. So Khabib, he grew up in a part of Russia where, it's almost off limits to foreign travelers just because it's so dangerous. So there's a lot of terrorism that comes out of there and major world events, right, that can be scary and it is very dangerous to foreigners. So that's where he sort of grew up. He's been training in martial arts pretty much his whole life. He's wrestled bears, literally bears with, a muzzle on them, right? As one of his training partners when he's like 7 or 8 years old or something like that. And he still actually does wrestle with bears. He's done all kinds of Sambo competitions. So Sambo is definitely one of the more intense martial arts that you can do outside of MMA and boxing. So that's a lot of submissions. It's almost an MMA style fight, right? There is some striking with some throws and submissions, sort of a mix of kickboxing, judo, and a little bit of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And so Khabib, though, when it comes to his style, he's just a fantastic wrestler. He has the same game plan every single time. He, strikes fairly well. He leaves his chin a little bit open, but once he gets his hands on you, he's going to take you down to the ground, and he's either going to punch your face in or he's probably going to choke you.
Yeah, speaking of his ability to choke you, submit you, what he did in that fight against Poirier where he slipped the guillotine and somehow managed to turn it into a rear naked choke against the cage there, that's impressive. That tells you that, this kind of grappling skills that this guy has.
Yeah, no, definitely. So he's by far one of the best MMA wrestlers, I should say, right? So there's some guys that come from a wrestling background and they compete in the Olympics and all that, but sometimes it doesn't always translate very well. So there's guys that could have been very good high school wrestlers, very good college wrestlers, or just very good, Olympic athlete level wrestlers, world championship wrestlers. But it doesn't always translate very well just because when you add in the striking dynamic, right? And a lot of times you have to change your fighting stance. So when you wrestle, you put your dominant foot forward, right? So for me, I'm right-handed. I use the right side of my body. I kick with my right foot. So in wrestling, I put my right foot forward. Whereas in fighting, it's the opposite. You put your power behind you, right? So that you can get a little bit more wind up, more turn with your hips when you're hitting and kicking. And so now you're leading with your left foot. And for a lot of guys, it seems like it's only a small thing, but that's a big transition. Not only that, but with wrestling, you want to be bent forward a little bit more, have a lower center of gravity, right? So you can shoot effectively and drive through your shots. Whereas in fighting, obviously, you don't want to be bent down because that's how you get kneed in the face or uppercutted and stuff like that. And so it's a hard transition for some guys to make, but Khabib, I think by far has some of the best, if not the best in the world when it comes to MMA type of wrestling.
Well, to contextualize kind of Khabib's dominance too. He has only lost one round in his 12 UFC fights, and that was in the Conor McGregor fight. And if I remember right, that was a little bit even contentious that he lost that round. And then to add to that, the guy's never been knocked down or cut in a fight. Like, to go this long into a MMA or UFC career specifically without having any of those two things as a stain on your resume, that's insane. No one goes really undefeated in the UFC too. It's kind of like insane to be able to maintain this level of dominance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's unheard of and very unprecedented, right? So the only other guy that is somewhat comparable is Jon Jones, which I think we'll get into here in a little bit. But to be that dominant in MMA, and the thing that makes MMA so different from some of these other fighting sports, right, is the other fighting sports, they're one-dimensional. So in Taekwondo, kicks are coming at you, right? And that's what it is. That's what they do is they're kicking. In wrestling, a lot of it is just takedowns or defense to takedowns. And so if you can defend their takedowns or you can counter their takedown defense, you can win it. And boxing, all you're looking for is punches. MMA, though, you can lose a fight 3 different ways.
To even add to that, when you talk about like just wrestling in terms, you can even like scale that down even more too. If you go into like a Greco versus a traditional versus style, like you can like really piece by piece those. And there's all kinds of different like specialty acts in all these certain disciplines too. Whereas you're right, in a UFC game, you have to bring it all together into one. Like you mentioned how great of a grappler like Khabib is. He's managed to overcome that. And I've heard some people say he's not even the greatest striker in the world. And he did get popped in that fight against Poirier, especially in the first round. And you could tell that stung him. But he just bounces back like so well, like so much better than a lot of other fighters.
Yeah, and that's the thing is a lot of times the reason why it's so hard to be undefeated as well. So one, I said there's a lot of ways, right, that you can sort of lose the fight. You could be submitted, you could lose by a decision, or you could be knocked out. And a lot of times what you end up seeing in MMA is that there's this weird sort of triangle of people that can beat other people, but they'll lose to another person. So one of the best examples of this is Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, and Holly Holm, right? So Ronda Rousey can beat pretty much every woman, including Miesha Tate, and that's because she's found a way to counter Miesha Tate's wrestling using her judo, right? So every time Miesha Tate would take a shot, she would use judo to counter it, use sort of the momentum against her. Foot sweeps, all of that stuff, and she could beat Miesha Tate probably 9 out of 10 times. If you want to expand it, you could even say 99 out of 100 times. Whereas Holly Holm, though, could beat Ronda Rousey because her striking was so much superior and she was so long that she could keep Ronda Rousey from getting her hands on her. And Holly Holm, obviously would knock out Ronda Rousey. And I think if you were to redo that fight over and over again, Holly Holm would still be the winner just because she was such a superior striker. And then Miesha Tate, though, can beat Holly Holm probably almost every single time just because Holly Holm doesn't have the takedown defense. And so when it comes to Khabib, you would expect, right, that over time somebody would figure that out and figure out, hey, here's the weakness in his game, which is, can I keep his hands off me pretty much? Can I stay away from the fence so that he's not, push me up and crowding me into the corner or up against the cage where he can, land some vicious elbows or some dirty boxing strikes. Or can I keep him off my legs so he doesn't take me down? And you would think that there would be somebody that is, athletic enough, a good enough striker, and long enough to be able to avoid that. But we just haven't really seen that with Khabib.
With that said, do you think Khabib is the best pound-for-pound fighter right now in the UFC? Do you think where's his place right now on the historical rankings?
Yeah, so when it comes to historical rankings, I definitely have him up there. One of the guys that I had really high up there, obviously, was Daniel Cormier. It's hard to argue for him now that he's lost his last fight, right? So he has to definitely take a step back. And he's lost before, obviously, to Jon Jones. Jon Jones is also up there, though for me, and this is just me personally, I find it difficult to rank a guy that high that has done steroids, right? So he's been popped, and maybe he was not popped necessarily for steroids himself, though he did get popped for T-ball, but he's been popped twice for banned substances. And a lot of people still give him the benefit of the doubt, and they say, hey, it was a tainted substance, or, he took some pills, right, because he'd said that he was having some fertility issues or something like that. And to me, I don't know if I believe those, especially twice. Like, fool me once, shame on you, but fool me twice, shame on me type of thing. So I find it hard to rank Jon Jones that high up there. But Khabib, I definitely think you have to give it to him. There's really nobody else that has gone undefeated for this long, right? He still has not lost a fight, and he's been that dominant. Even guys, right, like Anderson Silva was not that dominant. George St. Pierre was very good, but even he had lost a few times and been knocked out. And so Khabib, honestly, if he can continue this, I can see him going down as the greatest of all time. Some of the issues, though, when it comes to Khabib is, especially early in his career, there was not a lot of guys that were high level that wanted to fight him. And so there was literally guys turning down fights with Khabib because I get it. They don't want to lose, they don't want to lose a fight, especially if you're next in line for a championship. Why would you want to fight Khabib? But even since he's become champion, right, there hasn't been as many high-level competitors that you would hope to see Khabib fight. And I think that's out of Khabib's hand. I think he wants to fight those guys, but he doesn't always get the chance. And then the other thing is Khabib hasn't gone up another weight class, and that's where Daniel Cormier, I think, does get a few points, right, is he's won both at the light heavyweight outside of John Jones, and he went up to heavyweight, cleared out the division except for Stipe Miocic.
I guess that's a fair point, too, when you consider best pound for pound. That would also imply that you're fighting at multiple weight classes. Now, it'd be interesting. So a big thing that could also shake the scales in terms of Khabib's legacy is this fight that has never really happened. So Tony Ferguson was the first one to want to call out Khabib as soon as the results of that fight went through. He jumped on there. He had an ESPN interview with Ariel Helwani, and he had some interesting quotes in there. At the top of the list, sign on that dotted line, and you'll get a good old-fashioned American ass whooping. Now, Tony Ferguson, this guy's no scrub. He has a 12-fight winning streak going back all the way to 2012. Kind of disappointed he only has 12 fights in that time, but we could talk about that a little later. He's 15-1 right now in the UFC, and yeah, he's just has a perfect style to really kind of combat Khabib, according to all the experts. So what do you think needs to happen to make this fight happen? Because it seems like they're a bit snake-bitten, and if you don't know the backstory too, this fight has been scheduled 4 separate times, but has fell through each of those times. In 2015, Khabib had to withdraw due to rib injury. 2016, Ferguson had to withdraw due to fluid buildup in his lungs. 2017, Khabib had to be taken to the hospital because he was cutting weight and it caused issues with his kidneys. And then last year, 2018, and this is the most ridiculous of them all, Tony Ferguson tore ligaments in his knee, turning sharply to greet fans at a media event. So, 5th time's a charm?
Yeah, so I really hope so. So I've been waiting for this fight for a really long time. Obviously, we said, dating back to 2015, right? And we're now almost into 2020. And I really hope that we see this. One, for Tony Ferguson, I think he's earned a legitimate title shot. So he's gotten the interim belt before, but then for some reason, he's never really gotten to actually solidify that belt and fight for the actual title. And I think he's long overdue. He's another one of those guys with a super long fight win streak. He finishes a ton of people. And like you said, his style, to me personally, I think he has one of the most exciting styles in the UFC. He's very fluid, very smooth. He transitions every single hit that he has into another movement, right? So he'll throw a punch and then quickly turn that into an elbow, right? Or you shoot in on him, you think you're going to take him down, he turns it into a forward roll, escapes, and then he's back up and throwing some more kicks at you and some more knees. He also goes straight from takedowns right into a submission, right? So he can, take you down and then put you right away into an arm bar or a choke of some kind. And so the fluidity and how smooth he is what I think can be dangerous against Khabib. Not only that, but like I said, Khabib leaves his chin open. A lot of times he sort of leads with his head down when he swings. And I think Tony Ferguson is such a clean and polished striker that he could take advantage of that. And so if there is a guy that can beat Khabib, I really do think it would be Ferguson. And I really hope it happens. I hope it happens by the end of the year. I don't see a whole lot of other people that you could say are next in line other than Ferguson, right? So he's at the top of my list, I believe. So I'd like to see it happen, hopefully by the end of the year even.
Well, we want it to happen by the end of the year, but the UFC does have a lot of fights that they still have to schedule too. Masvidal and Diaz, that got announced, and then you have Manny Nunez still needs to defend her title one more time before the end of the year. So it's gonna get close. We only have 3 months at the end of the year, and the fact that 2019 has flown by this fast is a whole nother story. But it's interesting. So he's made some bold claims. He's a very aggressive fighter in his style too. So like the way he talks about Khabib, that he's lazy, that he's a bit of a wet blanket in the ring. He has to back that up if he wants to break the code, as he says.
Yeah, and like I said, I think he can. He's been in some wars before. I think he's only ever lost like one fight in the UFC anyways. He might have lost one or two before getting into the UFC. But I think he can definitely back it up. The one thing from the UFC perspective, though, is do you want to put Khabib against Ferguson right now? Especially when Khabib is starting to get a little bit more popular, right? So he dismantled Conor McGregor, and Khabib sort of has all of Russia behind him, which Russia, the thing that's difficult with Russia, and Khabib has even said it before, is that to hold an event there, it would be extremely popular. They love their fighting sports. And literally, Khabib got, a call from Vladimir Putin as soon as he won the belt, right? So that tells you how much this country is into their fighting sports, right? So our big champions, right, when it comes to, let's say, football and basketball, they all get invited to the White House. When it comes to Russia, they get invited after they win some type of fighting championship. So the Russians are always dominant when it comes to wrestling, and they typically always win the world and the Olympics as a team, and a lot of times as individuals. Obviously, they love sambo, taekwondo, anything that's fighting, the Russians love. And so if Khabib loses, right, do you somewhat lose a little bit of that whole Russian audience that you get? And the difficult thing, though, is Russia is a little bit poorer, right? So even though they're a big market size-wise, you don't have as many that can buy pay-per-views and stuff like that. But you still have a whole country, right, that supports Khabib right now. Whereas if, Ferguson beats him, now, you sort of lose that sort of country and some of that audience right there. So from the UFC standpoint, I think it's a fun, exciting fight, though it comes with some risk that if Ferguson does beat Khabib, right, you may possibly lose some of that Russian backing and that Russian momentum that you've sort of been building.
The thing about fighting that's always tough is the longer you wait on scheduling these fights, the more you open the door for something bad to happen. Like the way we were talking about DC versus John Jones 3 just being an absolute lock to happen, that fight went out the door because of the Stipe fight. If, let's say, Khabib or Ferguson loses to someone they're not supposed to lose to, then suddenly all the talk of that fight just cools and not anyone's as interested as they would be otherwise. So you always have to capitalize on these fights when they're at their hottest, because they could lose steam very quickly.
Yeah, definitely. And the other thing, too, that you run into is think about like Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao, is when that did happen, it was still a very big fight, huge revenue generator. But then it leaves you open for, this fight happened way too late, right? And I think that could be the same thing, especially when it comes to these fighting sports, is the athletes age so quickly. And so even dating back to 2015, you might be able to argue they were younger, right? They're more athletic. I think these guys are still just as good as they were back in 2015. But fans start to say, hey, so-and-so is getting a lot older. This fight should have happened 2, 3, 4 years ago. So I think you're exactly right. I would like to see it happen as soon as possible. The one thing I will say, though, is, and going back to if Khabib possibly loses this fight, is that's why it's so difficult to name a greatest of all time, because as soon as they lose, right, it's like, can you really say that they're the greatest of all time now, right? Anderson Silva for a long time was considered the greatest of all time. He loses to Chris Weidman. Okay, he's no longer really in discussions anymore. And that's why I think you tend to want to go out on top. And so I'm not going to say Khabib's going to avoid this fight, right? By no means. I don't think Khabib is scared at all. But if Khabib wants to stay undefeated, his best chance is fighting other people and accepting other fights outside of Ferguson.
Unfortunately, I do think that would always stain his legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And not to be too prisoner of the moment, but I do truly believe at this point that Khabib is the greatest pound for pound in the sport at this time. I don't know if he's necessarily the biggest ticket draw, but he definitely is the best fighter right now.
Yeah, I think he's definitely underrated as a fighter, which is crazy because he's a champion. But I really do think that he does not get the respect that he deserves. He's one of the best fighters that we've seen. And yes, he uses wrestling, but that's exactly what you're supposed to do in MMA. Why would you try to fight somebody else's style when you risk getting knocked out, or, an arm can get broken, or you can risk major damage to you? So why not fight the fight that is your game plan that you like to do? And I think Khabib's the best at executing his game plan and working to his strengths and not his weaknesses.
I mean, the old saying is, if it ain't broke, why fix it? So,
exactly.
All right, well, moving away from your favorite sport to a sport you're self-admitted to be a little bit lukewarm on. you're very honest with our listeners last week that baseball's not really your thing. So let me ask, are you more likely to watch if there's guaranteed to be multiple home runs a game?
So I will say, yes, baseball is not my favorite. I do actually like to go to baseball games in person, though. So every time I'm on the road, I'm in a big city, especially LA. I always go to the Angels games. I've been to a few Dodgers games. I do like to go in person. As far as home runs, though, I think it's always more exciting, right? Like, you love to see those guys just jam it out of the park, and it's always cool when you see a big hit. A lot of the times where there's not home runs, I think the game can get a little bit boring, right? When you have guys that are bunting or doing whatever it is that, are not as big of a play, it's less exciting to watch.
Okay. And the reason I set up like our next topic with that question is Major League Baseball broke the record for the single season home run mark again. So they broke it twice in a 3-year span with 6,173 home runs leading into play here on Friday, September 13th. Keep in mind, there's still 2 weeks left on this season. So the previous record that they broke was just set in 2017, as I mentioned. That was 6,105. In the last 4 years, 2016 through 2019, all 4 of those years are on the top 5 all-time home run list. So baseball's definitely doubled down, and it's led to a lot of interesting conspiracy theories in regards to this. So the main thing is, if you're not juicing the players, are you juicing the balls?
Yeah, so I've read some, I guess, sort of studies that they've done on this and changes in the balls. And people have found that, like, statistically, there is a slight difference between the balls prior to 2015 and then after 2015. And it's very small changes, like the material is slightly different. It's only like 1 gram or something that the core of the baseball weighs less. But I mean, it looks like things are definitely different. And I can't really see too much of another reasoning for why the balls, why there would be so many home runs. There is some, statistics that you can get into and analysis and stuff, but I could honestly see it. And at the same time, right, is the league has to do some stuff to boost ticket sales. So I know that there's sort of been a ticket slump when it comes to actual like seats and going to stadiums, right? And I think home runs, if you can get more home runs, it's a good way to do it, especially in a sport like baseball where, a little kid gets to keep the ball after the game, right? So I think it's a good way to get people in the seats. So I think they might be juicing the balls. What do you think?
I mean, kids are happy if they go home with a foul ball. Kids are stupid sometimes, let's be honest.
That's true.
But with that said, the main thing that's changed, so you mentioned 2015, we mentioned 2015 is kind of like where this like really took off. What was one of the biggest changes? One of the biggest changes I noticed in 2014, Rob Manfred replaced Bud Selig as the commissioner of Major League Baseball. Now, I wasn't the biggest Bud Selig fan. Full disclosure, too, I'm a San Francisco Giants fan. So naturally, I love Barry Bonds. And Bud Selig wasn't the biggest supporter of that, although he was the commissioner during the steroid era, and he willingly let it happen for years, knowing that it was driving up his ratings. He was very vocal about himself not being too thrilled of Barry Bonds breaking Hank Aaron's home run record in 2007. He said it was unpleasant. It was the most miserable time of his life. He's a bit of a purist. Rob Manfred, on the other hand, is a bit of a businessman. And what drives business in the sport of baseball in particular? Those highlight plays, those home runs. And I think it's important, too, because with the rise of analytics, you've seen like certain like the value of a bunt like really go out the door. With all these defensive shifts, it's really hard to hit it into the field of play for these batters. All the defenders basically know where they're going to hit the ball. So how do you beat a shift? You hit it over the shift. You hit it out of the park. And that's what a lot of players have basically doubled down on. Basically, every player has changed their swing to just, swing harder, which kind of sounds like a stupid concept. It's like, why haven't guys been swinging harder for years if that's the idea? But people have been doing that. They've been changing the angle of their swing to get more lift. Fly ball ratio is definitely one of the key statistics when it comes to baseball these days. And I don't know if it's the main thing is it working? Because I've kind of like parsed the numbers and looked back at it. And so far, there's no evidence that it's really changing the ratings in a positive way. In the 80s and 90s, the World Series numbers, you would average about 20 million viewers per year, which is insane when you consider, here's the World Series numbers for the last few years. So in 2016, the Kansas City Royals versus New York Mets, that averaged about 8.6 million viewers per game, right? And then 2016, you had a bit of a spike, actually. So the Cubs versus the Cleveland Indians, 12.9 million viewers, which ain't too bad. And then in Game 7 of that series, they had 21.8. So their Game 7 was the most viewed World Series game since Game 7 of 2001 when the Diamondbacks faced the Yankees. Fast forward that a year, 2017, Houston versus the Dodgers, back down to 10.7. And here in 2018, it kind of bottomed out again at 8.3 between the Dodgers and the Red Sox. You can argue that was a bit of a terrible series. The Red Sox dominated all the way. But it's interesting to kind of like see, like, yeah, they changed up the game, but is it really having a positive effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. There's a lot of other things that are competing with baseball too, right? So you're starting to have basketball is doing really, really well right now for themselves. Like their ticket sales are always increasing. They're doing a good job. You got football, but now you sort of have the rise of MMA sort of taking off. And then you have a lot of other sports that are on like the ESPN threes and, you know, some of these more niche sports. And so I think there's a lot of competition right now in baseball, and it doesn't seem like it's working. Though I will say, I think it's at least worth a shot, right? To add anything that could be more entertainment value to sports and athletics, right? Always helps out. That's why I know that every commissioner in the world is going to tell you, oh, I don't like, you know, the bad guy, the villain. But a lot of people, like, they tune in to see the villains get beat, right? Like, we've talked a lot about Antonio Brown, and I don't want to bring him up again on another show, but people tune into him because they want to see what's happening and they want to see drama. And so if increasing home runs, right, is a way to add drama, or a way, you know, maybe not even drama, but excitement and entertainment value, I think it's always a good thing. But you're right, it doesn't seem like it's been working all that well. So maybe they have to find other ways to add to that entertainment value of baseball.
And maybe it's too early. I mean, if we're looking at these numbers right now, and we're only in the first 5 years of Rob Manfred as the commissioner, so we could see the net result of if it's going to impact the next generation. And baseball has a horrible reputation of always being behind the curve when it comes to making adjustments to improve the game. So they were the last sport to get in on instant replay. And then they always struggle with the time of games and everything like that. So you're seeing a lot of rule changes thrown out there, like cutting down on extra innings, the robot umps. A lot of are a bit contentious for people that are longtime baseball fans, and I understand why. But I will commend baseball on certain things that they're doing to try and make the game more viewer-friendly, such as they're the first major sport to want to get on YouTube, which I think is huge, actually, because YouTube is a go-to place for a lot of people looking to just get quick content. So releasing a game a week on YouTube, I think that's a great idea for the sport. But it ultimately is tough. And I'll admit this, too, even as like a Giants fan. So when you're not on a team that's consistently winning, it's hard to like embrace your team in those dog days of summer. Mm-hmm. In high school, I used to watch like at least 120 baseball games in a year on average. Mm-hmm. But people have lives. It's impossible to sit down and literally watch all these games. Certainly go to these games, especially the ones in the middle of the week. You're not going to PNC Park on a Wednesday afternoon unless, I don't know, you're unemployed. But if you're unemployed, you're probably not buying the tickets either because they aren't cheap.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that is in those statements that you just made. So I guess going back to the rules, right? If you look at the rule books for like the major sports leagues, so the NBA has only 68 pages in their rule book. The NFL has 89 pages in their rule book, but the MLB has 184 pages in their rule book. So I think when it comes to baseball, one, it's sort of a non-traditional sport in that in most sports, right, if it's football, right, you're moving down the field and then you score, right, and then it's the other person's turn, they move down the field, they score. Same thing in soccer, right, you move down the field, you score, or you move down the other way, you score. Basketball, same. Whereas baseball, it is similar, right, but at the same time, it's a little bit more abstract, right, you're running around the bases, and you sort of keep going until there's 3 outs, right? There is offense and defense, but it's not like your traditional offense and defense that we see in some of the other sports.
I would say one of the tougher things I've always kind of like mentioned at baseball, in particular at the youth levels, is with baseball, you do need a set amount of players. It's unlike basketball where you play one-on-one, soccer you play one-on-one, or even football 4-on-4, 7-on-7. Baseball, you pretty much need 9 guys or it's impossible to play. So it definitely does hurt the access to the game. Granted, you have seen it develop globally when you look at countries like Japan, the Dominican Republic, and everything like that. I think one of the greater jokes I've listened to in recent years is baseball is the most American sport because every year during the postseason, you'll see a bunch of Americans gather around their screen to watch 18 guys from the Dominican Republic play.
Well, so that's funny, and it's a good point. I think like some of the other things too that you sort of brought up and mentioned in your previous statement, or at least sort of touched on it, is there's a lot of games, like you said, right? So there's games literally every day of the week. And how many games is it in a baseball season? I know it's a ton, right? 160?
162.
162.
And then when you factor in certain things too, like obviously you have about 30 games in the spring training, which I love spring training. It's a great time. I like to go. But then you factor in the postseason, you have each of these series are going to take at least 3 to 4 games. Sometimes when each of these go into 7, sometimes they're playing all the way into like November, which is a bit of a strain on the season. When you talk about a season that begins all the way in March, doesn't finish until November, it's hard to keep people's attention spans, mostly because of the generation we're in. And mainly as millennials, keeping focus on certain subjects is not necessarily our strong suit. And when you talk about keeping focus on a baseball season for 162 games, that's where we falter as a generation, admittedly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's why you see so many millennials and whatever generation is after us, X or Y or Z or whatever it is. That's why there's always switching jobs, right? So you have a lot of people that'll move jobs frequently just because it's like, hey, I want something new. And it's the same thing, I think, with baseball, like you said, is you start to lose that focus. You're excited for opening day or whatever it is, but then like you're halfway through the season, and especially when a season is 162 games, does anybody really care about game number 50 out of 162? Or even like if you get up to, game 81, you're only halfway through the season, right? And, whereas with these other sports, especially like if you look at football, that's only 16 games, right? Game 8, right? So you're 8 weeks in possibly, depending on buys and all that. Like that's pretty important. That's halfway through the season. Even basketball is a little bit more games, a little bit longer. But at game number, 41, right? Like that's important. That marks the halfway mark. But when you're almost 100 games in and you're barely halfway through the season, it is a little bit hard to stay focused.
And, too, I will counter like one thing you said is baseball's a non-traditional sport. It's the most traditional sport. That's always been one of its biggest problems in terms of being able to adapt. Everyone's a purist when it comes to baseball. Even I'll admit, like I'm a little bit more resistant. Granted, I have changed in recent years when it comes down to it because there are certain things like when they changed adding a pitch clock to kind of increase pace of play. I agreed with that change because I got tired of seeing guys step out of the box, adjust their batting gloves, kick around their bat a couple times, mess with the dirt. Why do we have to deal with this? And when it came to changing the amount of times you could visit the mound in the inning, as great as it is to see a great discussion on the mound, if it takes up longer than 5 minutes, I don't want to see it. It's a waste of time. Get rid of it.
Yeah, no. And so, okay, I guess I misspoke when I called it a non-traditional sport. I mean, non-traditional in, I guess, sort of the style of play, right? Like when it's basketball or football or soccer, you have one team that has control of the ball and they're moving downfield, right? And they're either successful or they're not. And then it's the other team is moving downfield or down court. Whereas baseball, it's still sort of that objective, but it's a little bit more abstract. So I guess maybe traditional is not the way to sort of phrase that. But I think you're exactly right. And the thing with when it comes to baseball is the amount of play, right? So it's a 3-hour long game usually. And really the ball is only in play for about 18 minutes of action during the game. Now, similarly, football is also 3 hours long, and there's only about 11 minutes of real action when you're not in a huddle or whatever it is, right? The ball is actually moving, somebody's rushing for yards or whatever it is. I think the thing, though, with baseball is there are some people that do get really excited when you make a really good double play or something like that. But football is a little bit more exciting in that, like, hey, at the end of most plays, I'm going to see you get trucked or get hit, right? Like, and that adds to the entertainment factor of I like to see people get tackled and get hit. Same thing with like hockey, right? A lot of people like to see them get in fights or get checked into the glass and all that. Whereas baseball, you can't really do that, right?
Yeah, and I definitely think too, like when we talk about just this rabbit hole of things that are hindering baseball in terms of its growth and its potential to reassert itself as one of the big three major sports in America is the lack of star power. It's very noticeable out there. So you, as a non-baseball fan, I'm going to challenge you. Name me 5 players.
So I know Mike Trout for sure, mostly because I go to LA all the time, right? And if you're in Anaheim, you see his face everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, I know Manny Machado, who I don't even know if still plays anymore, but Manny Machado.
I hope so. He's in his 20s and just signed a 12-year deal.
Shows you exactly how much I know about baseball. So don't ever listen to me really on baseball topics when it actually comes to baseball analysis, right? I can give you my thoughts on baseball as a whole, but actual baseball players, I don't really know. I know Aaron Judge because he was sort of big when he first got into the league. And then outside of that, I cannot tell you too many more.
Well, I'm not going to judge you too hard on that one. But, all right, so it's disappointing. Like, baseball needs to do a better job, too, in marketing out these guys so that the fringe viewers like yourself, the people that don't keep tabs on the game as much, have something to rally behind. And I'm not saying that they should sell out like the NBA has, like be a full player commitment league to where they're giving all the power to the players. But I do think that they need to strike a bit of a balance somewhere where they're giving these guys a little bit of character to be able to put them back out there. Because in the 90s, when you talk about Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa, Barry Bonds, like these guys were everywhere. Derek Jeter in the 2000s. You couldn't turn on a TV without seeing Derek Jeter's face on ad. Right now, like some of the main guys in baseball aren't really featured as much. And it's disappointing when you have like literally the best player in baseball, Mike Trout. He doesn't want to be featured like a superstar should be. So I don't know. I mean, on the bright side, at least these guys aren't making attention for the wrong headlines, which is a plus. That's also hurt like the NFL in recent years.
Before we move off, I think that's a very good point. And I just want to say in baseball, a lot of times your star players are on really bad teams. And I think it's because it's just so much easier to pay guys that are fairly adequate when it comes to skill, right? Like you take a little bit of a hit in skill, but you save a lot when it comes to salaries, right? And so correct me if I'm wrong, Ju-Ju, but baseball is a no cap sport, right? So there's no salary cap. And so these owners have to decide, hey, how much do I really want to spend on these guys? And if you want all really good players, you can do that, but you got to pay a ridiculous amount of money. Whereas, hey, if I really want to win, right? So if I want to win a World Series, it's easier for me to get guys that are maybe not quite at the Mike Trout level. They're a step down, but they're just a whole lot cheaper, and I can afford a whole lot of them. And so I think a lot of times when you have your really good teams or your really good player anyways, their team might not actually be that good. And so do you really want to see the best player in the world not make it to the playoffs in the postseason? Not really. Whereas with some of your other sports, right, like you can have a LeBron James or a Giannis or a Kawhi Leonard, and they'll take their team to the playoffs, and you have your best teams going into the postseason. Same thing even a little bit in football, right, is you can have your Tom Brady's, or you can have like an Aaron Rodgers even has a chance of pulling his team, into the postseason, a Drew Brees. You have some of those guys that are not only they have star power, but they have the ability, just because of the way that the sport is and the way that the salary caps work, that they can pull their team into the postseason.
Well, I would say baseball is a unique mix of a bit of an individual sport while also being a team sport, one of the biggest team sports there is, in the sense that like when you're at bat, that's all you up there. And it's interesting because when you look at like wins above replacement and stats like that, the amount that some of these superstar players doesn't necessarily justify some of the contracts they have. And one day we'll have a bigger discussion when we could really look into it as far as like these contracts in baseball, because there haven't been a lot of 10-year deals that have really worked out. It's been one of the biggest things about baseball contracts as far in terms of players getting paid a year too late rather than a year too early, or 10-year deal 5 years too late sometimes. Yeah, that's interesting. But going back to the star power, so it's disappointing actually this week. So we did lose out on one of baseball's biggest stars this week. So Cristian Yelich, he actually had a fractured kneecap this week. So he fouled the ball off his knee, which just sounds like a miserable injury altogether. He was on pace to be the runaway MVP this year. He won the MVP in 2018. He was probably going to smash 50 home runs and also turn 30 stolen bases. So it tells you the kind of year this guy was having. Right now, the Brewers sit tied with the Cubs for the last spot in the playoffs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that team goes the rest of the way, if they can pull it together without their superstar. Now, let's see here. Let's close out the show by giving a couple NFL headlines. So one of the places I want to start this week is actually we're going to go back to Miami. And, boy, so avoiding talking about the game because we don't need to revisit that. After that game, basically the locker room just said, I don't want any part of this organization right now. Multiple players have requested trades, and just announced today, Minkah Fitzpatrick, who they drafted in the first round last year, he requested permission to seek a trade, and the Dolphins said, go for it. So are they tanking? Because I know they traded away Kenny Stills, Laremy Tunsil, Kiko Alonso, all these guys, but is it really possible to tank in the NFL? Because I guess I counter it a little bit, is because you don't really have that long of a leash to be bad for too long, especially if you're at the coach position. Like Hugh Jackson only had a couple years. Steve Wilkes in Arizona only had one. So Brian Flores, you don't have time to really tank, does he?
I don't think so. And I mean, so when it comes to Miami, can you really even say that you're tanking, right, to become good if you're allowing your sophomore players to go and find a trade and get out? And so I think, one, timelines don't really allow for it, especially because coaches are on such a hot seat, like you said, right? Like they can be fired even within one season. We've seen sometimes, right? Is, hey, you were just so bad in just one season, you're gone. The other thing, though, that I think is difficult when it comes to tanking with football as opposed to some other sports is that there's a lot of positions, right? So you have 11 people on the field at one time. So that's 22 starters that you're going to have both ways. And then you got to fill up a 53-man roster. And so one, not every college athlete is going to be good at the pro level at their same position or at all those positions you need to fill. And then there's only so much one position can do, right? So some positions are more valuable than others, especially when it comes to quarterback. We've seen that really good quarterbacks, their team can be fairly bad, but they can still sort of lift their team and improve the win percentage of their team, sort of just being a good quarterback on their own. Whereas with so many positions that you need, though, there's a lot of reliance, right? Is the quarterback themselves isn't going to be good. They have to have a good line. So even though, yes, they can help get your, pull your team up a little bit, you can't just tank to have your one good quarterback and then the whole thing's going to turn around. And so with Miami, yeah, they could tank and try to get their number one draft pick this year. It's not going to make them much better next year, though. And they need to be able to draft a really good offensive line still to be able to protect their quarterback. They need to be able to draft some really good defensive players. We've seen that Aaron Rodgers, right, is now finally happy that they have a really good defense. And it seems that defense has played a big part this year, at least at the start of the NFL season. And so there's just so many moving pieces that tanking for a really good pick doesn't carry the weight and the value that it does in some of these other sports.
You're right. You just don't find that much transformative talent. One of the big narratives when you talk about the Dolphins tanking is, tanking for Tua. I don't really see that because, first off, even if you do get Tua, is he a good enough player to turn this roster into something special? I don't buy it. And you just went out of your way to trade for a quarterback. Are they really giving up on Josh Rosen this quick? I don't think so either. Here's the thing about the NFL, too. There hasn't been a lot of great history in terms of tanking. Not that a lot of teams have actively done it, but there's been a lot of teams that have consistently been in the top 10 year after year after year and have not gotten better. So the Raiders, let's talk about them. So since 2004, they've been in the top 10 9 out of 15 years. I should note they were missing 2 draft picks in 2011 and 2012 because of the Carson Palmer deal. But in that time, they still only were able to compile a record of 81 and 159, so a 338 win percentage. You go to the Browns, 10 out of the last 19 years, they've been in the top 10, 0.314 win percentage in 18 seasons. The Jaguars, 14 out of the last 18 years, they've been in the top 10. And all they've managed to amount to is a 0.396 win percentage themselves. So basically, it can all be unraveled just by picking the wrong guys. And in terms of just the merit and tanking in general, it's not like Sam Hinkie nailed every draft pick for the 76ers back in the day either. They missed on Nerlens Noel. They missed on Okafor. You can miss in the NBA. It just so happens that like your margin for error is not as severe, just because obviously like a Joel Embiid can transform your team. Whereas if you miss in the top 10 in the NFL, like, or I should say, if you hit in the top 10 in the NFL, it doesn't have the same weight as it would on a 18-person roster like the NBA.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right on all of those points. The other thing too is so many guys want to get paid as well in the NFL. They know their careers are short, right? We've talked about a lot of injuries. And if you look at it, there hasn't been that many teams that have really ever had shots at winning a Super Bowl, even in the past decade, right? Like a lot of it has been New Orleans, right? Every now and again, you get a team like the Rams that, sort of sneaks in, or the 49ers at one point were good, but very few players ever get that chance at winning a Super Bowl. And so there's really not too many reasons for them to stay loyal to their team, right? Now, there are a few teams where it's like, hey, it's in my best interest to stay loyal, right? So you have, like I said, your New England Patriots. You're probably going to win a ring there. And if you really are competitive and championships are what motivates you, New England Patriots, obviously, right? Seattle Seahawks, they've sort of been another power. Even New Orleans was down for a little bit, though. The Steelers notoriously are usually pretty good. But for a lot of these guys, it's like, hey, I don't really have any incentive to be loyal outside of like, I want more money. And so by the time you've done your tank and you're a few years into your tanking, a lot of these guys that you did have that you might want to say, hey, I want to bring them with us when we are actually good and hopefully all my draft picks pan out. A lot of them end up going somewhere else because they're like, hey, I need to get paid now, right? We're not going to win a championship. I want my money, and that's what I'm going for.
A lot of this strictly hinges on being able to draft the right quarterback. For argument's sake, let's say they are tanking. I would say it would be in Miami's best interest to not go quarterback in this next draft and just wait for the Clemson quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, to come out rather than investing all in Tua. All right, so moving off of Miami because we don't need to talk about their futility a little bit more. So there is a serious subject. I know you said you don't want to mention his name earlier, but we have to. I don't want to go as deep into it as a lot of people would mention. So AB, obviously he's come under fire for this sexual assault allegation. Now, there's a reason, and it's that we haven't mentioned it to this point, and it's not to dismiss the severity of the allegations against him, but it's because that we feel it's more important to wait for the information to come out. Too many people jump the gun on these headlines, and we don't feel it's in our listeners' best interest to be one of them. If we get more facts here soon, we'll report them. But it's not about believing all women or believing AB. Lord knows we've called his character into question a lot in the last few weeks. But to say we still believe in innocent till proven guilty. So that's kind of like my piece on this subject for the time being until some other news headline sways me.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. Everybody should be offered that chance. They're innocent until proven guilty. That is the law, right? And so we don't know exactly what's going to happen with AB in this case. I think it's going to get ugly, right? It's going to get messy. It's really up to the NFL, right, and the local authorities to do a good, thorough investigation, which I hope they do. What I will say, I guess sort of speculating, though, is if AB is found guilty, how hard of a slap do you think the NFL sort of gives him, right? Because he sort of screwed over two owners, right, and two teams. So he screwed over Pittsburgh, though that you could say, well, some of that was Big Ben, right? But then he screwed over Oakland. And so we saw, right, that the NFL gave sort of a hard slap to Zeke on the Cowboys, and they've given a hard slap to some other guys. How hard do you think they come down on Antonio Brown?
Well, if he is found guilty, then it's not really an NFL issue at that point. It's a legal issue, and it's really just up to them at that point. So if it does get found he's guilty, then case closed. He's going to jail, and we're not even talking about Antonio Brown, the player, at that point. But like I said, we don't know anything. So until there's something else in the headlines, we're just going to move forward. Mm-hmm. We have actual football games to talk about. And last week, unfortunately, Dre, you got the advantage on me here. You beat me by a game here. So Dre went 10-5 last week. I went 9-6. We went ahead and washed the Detroit-Arizona game from the record just because it was a tie. So technically, no one was wrong, no one was right. just is what it is, a disappointment because who likes to see ties in the NFL? Going into this week, needless to say, we both picked Carolina. We were both wrong on Carolina this week. They went and lost 14-20 to the Tampa Bay Bucks. I guess in just recapping this game a little bit here, what do you think of Carolina's decision to not give the ball to Cam on that pivotal 4th and 1 to end the game?
I think some of it sort of says that they don't see Cam as sort of that game winner for them anymore, right? Because if you really believe that Cam is sort of this game winner, this transformational talent, that he's going to be the one to get you back into games, right? If we contrast it with Drew Brees in the Houston's game, he was able to pull them sort of out of that slump and get them that win in Monday night's game. But here we're seeing that maybe they're not trusting as much in Cam Newton, though CMC, I would definitely trust that dude. He's looked like a monster, especially since he's put on weight. But I wonder if they're slowly starting to move off of Cam Newton, if they're starting to lose that trust in him.
I think it's just, you're right. They are trusting their best offensive player in Run CMC because, I mean, he's just been so dynamic for them. But in years past, 4th and 1, that big body that is Cam Newton, you expect him to just fly over the top of that line and get you that first down. So it's disappointing for them. I can't believe Carolina is honestly 0-2. I had them maybe as a sneaky playoff team. I had them finishing 8-8 in our division preview, but I thought that was underselling them as a team. So we'll see if they could bounce back. It's disappointing for Cam and Ron Rivera too, who may be in the hot seat.
Real quick too is, I mean, Tampa Bay is not that great of a team this year, especially how bad they looked in their first game. And maybe they're better than we had thought after their first loss, but I don't see Tampa Bay as being this outstanding team right now. Especially, I thought they would be better with Arians as their coach. And so I'm a little bit worried for Carolina and Ron Rivera, right? I think they might continue to slide. Hopefully not, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see on that one. Moving into this Sunday's games, though, first game to start off the slate. Let's see if you make the same mistake of doubting Jimmy G again. So San Francisco is heading into Cincinnati. They are a 1-point underdog in this matchup. I'm going to have them winning this game. They stayed on the East Coast, so I think that at least they won't struggle from the same kind of issues that a lot of teams do when they travel from the West to the East. So that's going to save them in the morning game. In fact, Cincinnati has had to put in more travel this week, having to go to Seattle and back. So I'm going to be intrigued, but I'm going to go ahead and give San Francisco the 2-0 start here.
So, you know what? Just to be contrarian to you, I'm going to take Cincinnati. I do know that AJ Green's still out, and they've got some players that are banged up and injured. Andy Dalton looked good, though. I'm going to take Cincinnati. They're playing at home. I still don't trust Jimmy G all that much. I know that you guys were able to win the last time, but I'm still doubting you guys. I'll take Cincy.
Okay, next game in our lineup, we are looking at the Chargers. They are going into Detroit this week, so Detroit's obviously coming in with a 0-0-1 record, whereas the Chargers came up big and beat Indianapolis last week, albeit no one expected that game to go into overtime. What's your pick, Aundre?
I'm going to go the Chargers. I think they still just have a whole lot of weapons. I'm thinking that last week was sort of just a wake-up call, shaking the rust off from a long break right after last season. And so I think they'll be ready to go. I'm taking the Chargers.
Do you think they covered the line? I almost forgot to. So in the San Francisco-Cincinnati game, 1-point line, do you think they cover?
I think they cover. I mean, it's hard not to, but I think they cover.
Okay, and then Chargers-Detroit, a 2.5-point line.
Still think they cover.
Okay, gotcha. So Harris is going to be mad at me this week, but I'm actually going to pick them to lose in Detroit, picking them as a upset pick. It's going to be their home opener. And again, same issues traveling west to east. That is nothing to dismiss when it comes to NFL travel. So moving on to our next game, divisional matchup, we have Minnesota at Green Bay. So Green Bay got to start this season with 2 tough divisional games. This week, though, they get to do it at home in Lambeau. Now, the question I have with this one is, does Kirk Cousins' futility against winning teams still count if the team's only 1-0?
I think it might. Like, I really have not been that impressed with Kirk Cousins. I know he came out and said, like, hey, I know I need to do better in order to get this team to a Super Bowl. That's why they brought me in. And that is why the team brought them in, is they thought, hey, we can get so close with Case Keenum, right? We can probably do even better with Kirk Cousins, and it just hasn't panned out. That being said, I'm going to take Minnesota in this one.
I'm going to go with Green Bay. I think that they should be able to do that, and I think they're going to cover their spread as well. It's going to be a tight game. It's going to be a gritty game. Division games always are, but I liked what I saw from the Packers last week. All right, another division matchup here. Indianapolis is going into Tennessee this week, so Tennessee is coming off just absolute dismantling of the Cleveland Browns in that hype machine. And then, like I said, Indianapolis, they played well in their first game without Andrew Luck, so it's going to be interesting to see if they can keep that up. With that said, I love Tennessee's defense. I think they're going to swarm Jacoby Brissett. So I'm going to take Tennessee, and I'm going to go ahead and give them the over on this one. It's a 3-point line right now.
I totally agree. I think Tennessee looked really good, right? And maybe we just overhyped the Browns. I know Colin Cowherd, right? I don't take a lot of what he says too serious. I think sometimes he just tends to sort of get a rouse out of people, but he does have some good insights. And for a long time, he'd been saying, hey, the Browns are overhyped, right? They weren't that great last year, and especially the year before, they weren't very good. And so it's hard to go from being historically not good to being a playoff and even a Super Bowl contention team, which he's been saying it for a while. We'll see if it comes to fruition, his full, sort of projection. That being said, though, I think there is something to say about the talent that the Browns have, right? They are one of the most talented teams in the league, and Tennessee just sort of handled them, right, and made it look easy. And so I think Tennessee wins this week as well. I think I'll take the over.
Okay, so the largest line of this week is New England. They're heading into Miami, so I don't think there's enough Miami miracles to save the Dolphins this week. It's going to be an 18.5-point line. Now, here's the thing I'll say. Obviously, I'm picking New England to win this game, but I'm actually going to take the under on this points because when it comes to NFL games, this is just way too high, especially division games. New England always struggles on this trip for whatever reason. They might win it by a couple touchdowns, but 18.5, I'm not going to buy into that line.
Okay, so I'm taking New England, obviously, as well. And if Baltimore can hang 55 on Miami, I definitely think New England can. I get what you're saying about they always struggle in division games. No matter how weak the division is, are always a little bit tricky, and there's always extra rivalry there. But I think they easily cover that spread. I'll take the over.
I just learned my lesson last year after Buffalo went into Minnesota with like a 20-plus point line, and the Bills handled them. It's just one of those things about sports betting. Whenever you see a line this big, you just have to be wary of it. Moving onward, we have Buffalo. They are the 2-point favorite heading into the New York Giants. So 2 points, I feel like that's a bit of a modest line here. But they are going on the road, so I understand it a little bit. And the Giants actually played all right. Not too bad. So this could be – but I do believe Buffalo is going to beat a New York team for the second week in a row. I'm picking them, and I'm picking the points.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Even though they're playing away, I think Buffalo is just the overall better team. Right, I'm hoping Saquon for my fantasy pops off, but other than that, I think Buffalo has sort of the edge on them. I also take them to cover.
Okay, fantastic. 12th man action is going to go on the road this week, and they're going to head into Pittsburgh. So Pittsburgh's obviously coming off that ugly Sunday night game. And then Seattle, they had a bit of an interesting week, so they weren't expecting Cincinnati to come out as guns a-blazing as they did, especially on their own home turf. Seattle always struggles away from home, whereas Pittsburgh always is successful when they are playing on their home field as well. I'm going to take home Ben, and I think a 3-point line is reasonable for this game, so I'm going to take the under.
Yeah, so Pittsburgh, like you said, they had an awful loss, which I told you would happen, right? So that's my one up over you is that Pittsburgh game right there. Is they always struggle against the Patriots. But that being said, they generally rebound pretty good, especially when they lose early in the season. This is a team that historically doesn't stay bad for very long, and they usually rebound pretty well. The things that I am worried about, right, is you can sort of see now that Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell were definitely sort of the real deal for him, right? There was talent there, and anytime you lose talent, it's tough. That being said, I don't expect Pittsburgh to lose at home. Seattle did struggle a little bit, like you said last week. I'll take Pittsburgh. And I agree with you. I'm going to take the under. I think it's going to be a 3-point game.
Going on to the nation's capital, the Dallas Cowboys, America's team, are heading in there to face the Redskins. So always a rivalry game. They have this – Vegas has this at a 6-point line right now. But, man, the Cowboys really look good in week 1 against the Giants. I hate to say it, but Dak Prescott having a perfect passer rating, obviously he can only go backwards from there. But all the weapons on that team, whether it be Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, Zeke had his worst game, and I just think that he has to run off some of those margaritas from Cabo. But I'm going to go ahead and take Dallas over here, and I'm going to take the over.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm going to take Dallas. I'm going to take the over. They looked really good. I do think they're slightly overrated right now, right? Is a lot of people have said, at least in power rankings and what their thoughts are of the Giants, is that the Giants are the second worst team, right? With Miami being the worst team. And we didn't give that much benefit of the doubt to Baltimore, who dismantled the worst team. Whereas Dallas looked very good, right, against the Giants. Didn't quite beat them 55-10 like Baltimore did. But then all of a sudden, everybody's sort of overrating Dallas and saying, they're Super Bowl bound. So I don't think they're Super Bowl bound, but I do think they look very good. And I think they have, the chance at still winning their division. That being said, I'm going to take Dallas in this game. I'm going to take the over.
Speaking of quarterbacks with perfect passer ratings, God, I'm going to have to really eat my words when it comes to Lamar Jackson, or at least he made it seem like it against the Miami Dolphins. So Arizona is heading all the way to Baltimore this week, and they are 13-point dogs. So, again, Arizona, the other side of that tie the other week. So they looked awful in the first half, and they really pulled it together in the fourth quarter. And obviously Baltimore didn't really have much of a game. I'm actually going to say the under on this one, although I'm going to take Baltimore because I kind of believe that Baltimore might come out a little bit flat coming off such a high week one. And I think that's going to show. And Kyler Murray, he started to figure it out in the fourth quarter. And I think that could only continue ideally, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And shout out to Kyler Murray, right? To have that bad of a start and still be able to come back, and they didn't win the game, but they tied it, right? Is very commendable in my opinion. And that takes some good mental toughness that not a lot of people have, right? Especially if it's your first ever NFL start and you're off to that bad of a start in your first game, and yet you're still able to pull yourself out of that sort of lull and that slump. So you're a slump buster, how to throw that in there, right? And be able to still come out with a tie with one of the worst teams. A lot of people had said, hey, this is one of the worst rosters, maybe outside of Miami, and to still be able to come back in that game, I 100% appreciate it. But that being said, I'm going to take Baltimore. They just looked too good last week. Again, they beat a very bad Miami team that right now is probably just tanking, but I still think Baltimore wins this game, especially at home. You took the under?
Yeah, I'm going to take the under. I think 13 is a bit of a high line, and like I said, they coming off such a peak last week that can only regress from there.
Yeah, I agree with you, but just to be slightly different, I'll take the over.
It's just a big week for division games, too. Another AFC South matchup. So Jacksonville is heading into Houston this week. So Jacksonville, unfortunately, they lost their quarterback for the year. And we mentioned it during the division preview as well, that Nick Foles had never played a full 16-game season. And lo and behold, he breaks his collarbone in week one. So Gardner Minshew is stepping into this game. And he actually looked pretty good, if I'm going to be honest. But it's still first NFL start against this Houston team. It's going to be Houston, and it's not going to be all that close, too. I'm going to take the over on an 8.5-point line. Houston definitely might want to mercy roll them coming off that Monday night game because I can't imagine they're too happy with the way that game ended. Best game of the year, by the way. I just want to throw that out there.
Oh, yeah. It was a fantastic ending, exciting all around. I think Houston is also being severely underrated, right? So it's sort of the opposite of what happened with Dallas. Is Dallas beat a bad team, and they look very good, don't get me wrong, right? I think they're going to make the playoffs, but I think we overrated Dallas in that we're like, oh, now they're going to be in the top 10, right? Top 5, I've even seen some people put them. And then Houston, I've seen a lot of people dock them to where they're almost in the bottom 10 of the league, which I think there's no way, especially with how good New Orleans is. We know how good Drew Brees can be. And it sucks that they weren't able to maintain their lead, especially because, Deshaun Watson, I mean, what more do you have to do as a quarterback, right? Like the dude is a winner. He can get his team a nice lead into the fourth quarter, right? Even on, close to a game-winning drive. And then it's just his team ends up blowing it, right? His defenses blow it for him. So I feel bad for him. He's also been sacked a ton of times. So Deshaun Watson, I just want you to know I value you. Hopefully Houston can get you some more protection and a good line so you're not wore out, too quickly. But I'm going to take Houston. I'm going to take the over.
For the record, we currently both have Houston in our power rankings. I currently have them sitting at 10. You currently have them at 5. A little bit of a disparity, but I think it's just hard to rank them over teams that did start off week 1 with a victory.
Yeah, but I think not every victory and every loss is the same, in my opinion, right? So you can lose to a really good team and look very good. And to me, like, you either stay where you're at or you even move up possibly in power rankings, where you can be a very bad team. And to me, I don't move you up that much.
Well, shameless plug for the slumpbuster.com. Go there for our weekly power rankings. We'll put them out every, let's say, Tuesday.
Okay.
And let's see here. This is not going to be a good one. Kansas City is going into Oakland. Now, I know they lost Tyreek Hill, so that's something. And Oakland's coming off a surprising week. So we both had them losing Denver, coming off like the emotional struggles they've had to deal with the whole Antonio Brown saga. But with that said, like, Kansas City's the best team in the league. Well, okay, there's New England. We did rank New England as number 1 in our power rankings, but Kansas City's the best offense in the league, and this defense is not going to be able to contain them. So a 7-point line, even on the road, I think is way too low. I'm going to go ahead and pick Kansas City in the over.
100% agree. I know that, Oakland is probably less distracted now since he who shall not be named is gone, right? But still, Kansas City is just too much firepower for a team that's still in rebuilding mode. Honestly, I think Oakland is stuck between still trying to tank, but also be decent enough to at least attract people in Vegas. But they're basically a tanking team too. I'm going to take Kansas City, and I'll take the over.
And to add to that, when you consider trying to contain a passing attack, they also lost their starting safety in Jonathan Abrams, which in the best hope he gets well soon. In our next game, we have Chicago. They are heading to the Mile High City. So Chicago is currently a 2-point favorite. Coming off that disappointing opening night, it's going to be interesting. So them and Green Bay had the longest layoff of any team this week, so they had the most time to prepare for this game. And Denver is coming off a short week, just playing on Monday. So right now, all the factors are lining up in Chicago's favor. So I can understand why they're the favorites. I'm kind of conflicted too because I like Denver to have a bounce back. Where are you going? I'll let you choose first on this one.
I'm going to go Chicago. I think Trubisky's going to have a better game, though I don't know if he'll get back to the form he was in last season. I think he's still limited as a quarterback. I do like Chicago's defense is just so good, and I think Flacco is not the answer, right, in Denver. So I'm going to take Chicago, and I'm going to take the over.
I'm actually going to go with Denver. I just think that Mile High is a tough place to play, and I do think that there is something to Vic Fangio playing against Mitch Trubisky. Like, he was the defensive coordinator in Chicago the last 2 years, so if anyone has the tape on Mitch, it's Vic. So I'm going to go ahead and pick them to have a bounce-back week. I'm going with Denver. In our next game, so this should be a fun one from a narrative point of view, the Rams are going to be hosting the New Orleans Saints, so this is the first time these teams have matched up since the infamous no call in the NFC Championship game, which, by the way, on a side note, I am already sick of this challenging of non-pass interference calls. I've already seen like 4 or 5 examples to just go nowhere and waste time. So I'm over it. But in terms of the game, the New Orleans Saints, they're not the same Saints team that they are at home in the Superdome, and they did barely skate by the Houston Texans this week. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Rams and the over.
Yeah, so I think the New Orleans Saints, especially going on the road against a really good team, right, the Rams, they're still obviously a very good team. They've got a very good defense. Their offense didn't look as sharp as it normally does last week, but they still have all their offensive weapons, really. I'm going to take the Rams, and, man, I think it's going to be right on. I think it's going to be right around 2 points.
2 points, yeah. There's not too many point outcomes, I think, that like fit under that ratio.
I know. That's the hard thing with these lines, right? Is like if it's a 1 point game or if it's anything off of 3 points, right? Because there's a field goal. But I think it's going to be right around there. If I do take the over, it's not going to be by much, right? I think it's going to be within like 3-4 points.
We have the Eagles going into Atlanta this week. This right now is sitting at a 2-point line. So Philly, they started pretty slow against Washington, which was a bit surprising to a lot of people. And then Atlanta just came out with no firepower at all against Minnesota. They got decimated out on the road by that power run game that the Vikings have been working on. I don't know. Philly on the road Sunday night, it's going to be a bit of a tough one. Julio Jones has been able to wreck the secondary. I think I'm actually going to go with Atlanta.
Oh, okay. I was going to take Atlanta if you didn't take Atlanta, but again, just to sort of conflict a little bit, I'll take Philly in this one. I do think you're right. They look really good, right? And Matt Ryan's a fantastic quarterback. Julio Jones looked good. I think Carson Wentz, though, he sort of woke up in that second half. So I was a little bit worried that he was going to look as bad as he did in the first half for the whole season. But even me, I was in one of my fantasy leagues. I was playing against Carson Wentz going into halftime. I was winning. I was projected to win that game, but I knew I was like, oh no, Carson Wentz is going to pop off. Sure enough, he did. He looks good. He's back to form. And if he continues to play like that, I think Philly's going to be a really tough team to beat. So I'll take them. And I think they cover.
All right. So this one, I guess you could consider either the Colin Cowherd Bowl, the Mono Bowl, whatever you want to discuss. But the line in this game has changed quite substantially just based off what we found out happened to young quarterback Sam Darnold. Did you really – I just got to ask, before we go into this actual game, mono still a thing?
It's when you kiss too many girls, Ju-Ju. That's what happens, you know?
Okay, but he didn't catch it the entire time he was in Los Angeles. I mean, LA, New York, they're both, you know. But
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he kissed a rat or something. I don't know. I'm just kidding. He did not. So
one of the best conspiracy theories I have read for this game so far, the New England Patriots have not made a deal with the New York Jets in Bill Belichick's entire tenure, ever since he did that one-day contract with the Jets and everything like that. And then this week, they trade Demaryius Thomas conveniently to those New York Jets. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in these rumors, because partially I don't buy into the idea that Bill Belichick traded Demaryius Thomas to the Jets just to make out with Sam Darnold. It just seems a little bit obscure to me.
Is that what the theory is? Is that he sent him over there just to make out with Sam Darnold? That's actually a pretty funny one though. And what if it happened? What if it wasn't even a makeout session? Like it was maybe one of those weird like handshake hug things, and Demaryius like brushed his lips against Sam Darnold and just like, oh sorry, my bad, dude, and then spread it that way.
You think it'd be mafia style where he like kissed both cheeks?
Yeah, kiss of death right there. Kiss both cheeks, and Sam Darnold's out for indefinite, right? We don't know how long, and sometimes it takes people a while to rebound from mono.
Get a cooler STD, Sam. Come on. Anyway, it's the actual game, so it's hard to not pick the Browns, just given that we know that the Jets aren't going in with their starting quarterback. Disappointing for the Jets season, because if Sam Darnold is going to miss multiple weeks, they're coming around the roughest part of the schedule. They might have lost those games anyway, but this was probably one of the wins that they were hoping they might have been able to pull down. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Cleveland, and just because, again, backup quarterback, I'm going to go ahead and take the over.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I'm going to take Cleveland. I'm going to take the over. And like I said before, Cleveland is still one of the most talented teams in the league. It does seem like they've been overrated slightly, right? They may turn things around throughout the season, and who knows? I still have them going to the playoffs, but right now, Cleveland, I think, is just going to be too much for New York to handle, especially with Sam Darnold, obviously, being out with mono. So kissing too many Demaryius Thomases. So
yeah, it's a beautiful chocolate man, honestly.
Yeah, those kisses on the cheek, kiss of death.
Well, Sam, just get better. Just it's such a ridiculous injury. I just wanted to close the show. Who gets mono? Come on.
Especially if you're older than like 14 years old. Now, you're right. It is. I 100% do hope that Sam Darnold is okay and gets better soon, right? And is not out for that long. But the last time I heard of anybody getting mono was literally back in 7th grade.
Exactly. Like I said, get an adult STD, like Sam. Come on. Get the clap or something. At least be an adult. I remember when I had my first beer.
Yeah, and I wonder how that conversation went with the training staff. Even like, hey, so one of our guys has mono. Like, not the flu is going around. We got to wipe everything down and sanitize it. Or he's out with an injury, right? He strained something or sprained something or tore something. He's out with mono. Like,
Oh,
I don't know what you do.
Adam Gase didn't even want to really even embarrass Sam Darnold. So in his presser, he went up to the podium and was like, oh, yeah, 14 is out with mono. It's like, well, we all know who 14 is, Adam.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other ways you could have phrased that, right? Like Sam Darnold has, an undisclosed illness. We hope of a speedy recovery, right? Something like that. But no, number 14 has mono. Okay, let's move on.
Couldn't lie to us or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he came down with the flu, literally, right? And we all know, like, hey, it's a very severe strain of the flu. Okay, he's gonna be out.
All right, well, that's a good way to end the show, I guess. Always awesome talking to you, Dre. Don't go and catch mono in between our next show. I hear it takes you out for a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm gonna be careful of anybody that wants to give me the double cheek kisses. So
don't hang around any Italians. Gotcha.
Exactly. But anyways, I'll catch you later, Ju-Ju. Thanks for having me on.
Peace, man.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to us via Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play Store, or our YouTube channel. You can also find us on social media at Slumpbuster Podcast on Instagram, at Slumpbuster Pod on Twitter, or at Slumpbuster FFB for fantasy football coverage. Check out our website as well, theslumpbuster.com, for Dre and myself's power rankings, league pick'em standings, and more information regarding the show. We'll be back with another episode next week. Until then, we'll see you next time.